Since we're in December, we're approaching Christmas, which has for a long time been one of the most sacred parts of the year for Europeans, for Nordic peoples. And we're starting to see Christmas commercials. If you're in America and Europe, they'll be with race-mixed couples, always. I don't know if that's a feature here, hopefully not. I would hope that. But you know, it's become a sort of a symbol of progress. Everyone is extremely happy, and you have basically homosexual couples having children in these TV commercials for Christmas, and it all seems kind of empty. It's just a sort of a glossy surface that is not even very glossy anymore. And behind and underneath the surface, people are taking antidepressants at a level like never seen before, and people are isolating themselves, not really participating in the world, and women are not having children, and our politicians are basically urging us to accept mass immigration to replace us because we don't have children of our own, at least in Western Europe. I don't know the figures here, but I mean it's quite bad. So it would seem that the modern world is a reductio ad absurdum of the theory of progress, that everything is getting better all the time. So somewhere along the way, we took a wrong turn somewhere, and that's what we're going to talk about today. My explanation of that, at least. I'm glad to see that you guys are not in the same bad state as a lot of Northern Europe, Western Europe, which has completely lost its spirit. Obviously you guys have gone through a lot of hard stuff, but I mean it's probably better to have a fighting spirit and fight rather than to lose that fighting spirit and lose the will to power completely and just go voluntarily to your grave. So I want to thank you very much for inviting me to speak here. It's been so far. I only arrived yesterday, last night, and it's been very inspiring so far. I've seen what you guys have, which is completely unimaginable where I live and the places I've visited before. So that's very impressive. I'm going to talk about paganism as a metaphysics. That's a big word, and it's not really as mysterious as it might sound. Metaphysics is the entirety of a worldview, sort of like if you've heard of the term paradigm in science, for example, that a paradigm is the framework that you have for the entire discussion of a subject, basically, and metaphysics has meant a lot of different things throughout history, and it means still today, of course, different things depending on the context you use it. What I mean is just the fundamental values, the starting point of your discussion when you discuss a worldview or when you discuss a perspective on the world. So I don't mean anything supernatural or anything like that. I just mean the fundamental framework, basically the axioms of your discussion. My philosophy that I call paganism, and I should add that I'm not going to talk about any sort of religious rituals or anything like that. I'm going to talk about paganism as metaphysics, as a worldview, so as a perspective on reality, basically, and the world we live in. And my philosophy starts with a concept called Thrownness, Geworfenheit in Heidegger's terms, basically. The idea that we are thrown into the world. Now that is, perhaps it sounds very esoteric and mysterious, but it really isn't. To understand it, we will just contrast it with the opposite, which is the tabula rasa perspective on how humans work, and which is the fundamental aspect of liberalism. Now, the tabula rasa idea about humanity is that we are born as blank slates. We are born as empty sheets of paper, and we can choose who to become. So basically our job is to write our own life story and decide who we are to be, and decide where to go. So basically everyone starts at the same starting point in life, and we can make our own decisions about what we want to be and where to go, and only our imaginations sets limits for what we can be and where we can go. And it usually involves rejecting things that are seen as confinements, like traditions and family and so on, that those are seen in the modern liberal mindset and worldview, those are seen as limitations instead of anything beneficial. As opposed to the tabula rasa, as opposed to this blank slate mindset, is what Heidegger calls Thrownness. The idea is that at the very start, when we start to exist, we exist already with family connections, we exist with a history, we exist with social connections, with a tribe, an ethnicity, a race, a lot of things that we don't choose. And those things are usually, what I would say, what makes our life meaningful. And the modern worldview is based on rejecting those very things. It's based on pretending that our family doesn't exist, it doesn't matter who you are, your social relations don't matter, your tribe doesn't matter, everything is basically just a social construct, and you can just disregard those aspects of life. And I hope that is that can convey, that example or that illustration can convey something of what I mean by, or what, the term comes from Heidegger, that already when you start to exist, you do so with inner reality. No two people start from the same place. Everyone starts in the middle of the world, already with lots of connections that you don't choose, loyalties that you don't choose, and that is your identity. You don't choose your identity, you're born with it. And that's why he used the term Dasein, being there. No human is born as a blank slate. Already when you're born, you are at a specific place. You don't just exist, you exist in a specific place with specific connections, with specific roots, ethnic connections, tribal connections, and so on. And basically there has been a sort of one can make a distinction between an individual basically and a person. The modern world, the sort of economical idea about humanity is that they are individuals, they are interchangeable, sort of like economic units that can be moved over national borders and so on. Because those roots don't exist, while a person is a person with those connections, with an identity ready-made when he is born. So, how did we end up where we are now? I would say that it started with a fundamental mind shift in a mindset that started with Christianity. So, before Christianity, people had rejected religious entities, rejected the gods, and accepted new gods, and there had, of course, not been complete rigidity in religious aspects. But what was new with Christianity was that when you accept Christianity, you're forced to reject your roots. This is also illustrated by the fact that Christianity starts with the year 0, to sort of illustrate that nothing that happened before Christianity matters. So it's a severing of the roots, cutting off your roots, and starting anew. And that creates a sort of a shift in, a paradigm shift in the world view of humans, a spiritual paradigm shift. And as Nietzsche pointed out, and as I agree, all the revolutions that have happened after that have been a part of this very Christian spiritual revolution. So basically, if you see Christianity, the Christian revolution as a big circle, you can, all the other sort of political revolutions and the gender revolutions and so on have happened within that circle. There are smaller circles within that circle. That's how I would illustrate it. And some people would see Christianity as conservative today, but that's basically in the same way as a revolution that has been successful becomes entrenched, and those values want to preserve themselves, so they become belligerent against outside views, basically. Just like modern art is based on, a lot of modern art theory is based on the idea that you're supposed to rebel against traditional theories, and you're supposed to rebel against the established norms in society. But since those norms now have become, the norms of rebellion against those norms have become the new norms, art today, modern art today, defends those values against anyone who wants to question them. In the same way, Christianity has become quote-unquote conservative, but it is actually the most fundamental revolution of them all, which is because no other revolution has been able to start from year 0 and sort of disregard everything. There are historians who want to start study of history at the French Revolution, basically, to start from 0, because everything that went on before that was sort of irrelevant, because the real history of ideas started with that very point. And it's the same thing with Christianity. It's built on rejecting your roots. Now, after Christianity, if we move forward to the French Revolution, also that's also an example of severing roots with history. You start at basically an armchair philosophy type situation where you imagine what a good society would look like, an abstraction, and then you impose that on society, and you disregard political history. So you cut the head of the king. It's all of these actions are very symbolic, of course, and you sort of you cut off tradition. Edmund Burke, who wrote about the French Revolution, I mean, the French Revolution is not the first, and it's not the only, of course, but it's a symbolic. It has a symbolic value, so I use it as an example of this type of cutting off history at the political level. And Edmund Burke had a description of this, which was that basically politics had developed through a natural selection, basically. So that things that were stable and worked over a long period of time took up an existence of their own. And when you cut off those things because you imagine that something will work, you just destroy what actually works. And that's obviously completed, well, at least to some extent, with the communist revolution. Is just an extension of the French Revolution. It's an extension of the same mindset. Welcome. Right. And then we can move forward to the 1800s, thereabouts, with the revolution in culture and art, with modernism, which is also based on the idea that you're supposed to reject the roots, rebel against the roots, not continue, not build on the roots, not build on the history. You're supposed to reject history and start from anew, basically. You revolt against traditional perspectives and instead of creating understandable narratives, you create chaos and you play around with structure in art, like the Dadaists, just creating complete chaos instead of having a sort of comprehensible narrative and modes of representation and so on. It's built on rejecting history. And if we move to the post-Second World War era, now the turn has come to biology. We're going to reject who we are biologically. So your ancestry, your genes don't decide what race you are, because race is a social construct. You're not born as a man or a woman. You're supposed to choose, make up your mind, your own mind, about if you're a man or a woman, and so you're left basically with nothing, and you're left with nihilism. And I would say that Christianity, as an attempt to combat this, would only be a very temporary solution. It's not the fundamental solution. It's sort of like if people would say that things were better in the 80s, which they probably were in many places, you know, but it's like, yeah, we didn't have, things weren't just as insane as they are today, but still things were not good, and we were heading in this direction. So it's still built on the very fundamental mistakes of on the level of worldview, basically. And one of the interesting aspects of this idea that we're supposed to make up our own minds about what humans are, and we're going to reject tradition, we're going to reject history, and we're just going to take an abstract, universal view and just make up our own minds about what humans are, is that they're built, this new image is always built on a utopia which rejects and ignores certain parts of human nature. And one of the aspects that's supposed to be rejected by the modern worldview, by liberalism, is what Plato called thumos. Plato divided the human soul, the human characteristics, into three parts, basically: the mind, intelligence, the appetites that are sort of situated in the stomach, and thumos, which is situated in the chest, which is the spirit, the fighting spirit, sometimes translated as anger. And it's the fundament, it's the basis of nationalism, it's the basis of pride, it's the basis of wanting to fight against that which offends you. And basically, when you do a thing like that, it's always parasitical to some extent, because even the worldview that rejects that very thing has to appeal to that thing to establish it, to fight for it, to impose it on others. So even liberalism that's based on pretending that thumos doesn't exist has to appeal to masculine values and pride in order to impose that liberalism, that very liberalism, on others, to get people to fight. It's sort of like Stalin, of course, appealing to nationalism in order to fight the Second World War, because you have to appeal to some sort of pride to get people wanting to take action, basically. So it's always parasitical. And since we're here for a festival on black metal, I think it's appropriate to just draw a parallel to the very aspect of Thumnus, because it is represented by it's an expression of anger. It's a symbol of anger, and it's a symbol of aggression and the wild parts of human nature that Christianity and liberal democracy, polite society generally wants to pretend that those aspects don't really exist. I think sometime in the 90s, he described the phenomenon of black metal as a resurgent, as an atavism, basically, a resurgence of the wild hunt, the ASGARDSREI, which is quite appropriate for this occasion. Because during the wild hunt, people were, young men were always sort of, they dressed up they painted their faces as corpses. They were supposed to represent their dead ancestors. They created a lot of noise, wreaked havoc around them. I'll just read you a little quote from that essay. So this is, he quotes a research article about the wild hunt. Those groups have various means to approach the other world, to reject a religious ecstasy, disguises, masks, noise, intoxicating beverages, movement and music, but also invocatory formulas similar to magical chants, etc. With their disguises as well as their behavior, the masked ones want to demonstrate they represent supernatural entities and not human beings. They dress as ghostly as possible, speaking with a falsetto voice, reaching ecstasy by dancing, music, and noise. Their clothes should be as nightmarish as possible. They attempt to dress as ugly as possible. They had terrible eyes with big white rings or painted up with charcoal. End of quote from him. All these characteristics are also elements in black metal music which came into existence in Scandinavia and above all Norway at the beginning of the 90s. Many black metal musicians paint their faces in demonic black and white grimaces, dress in ancient Nordic clothes, or adorn themselves with emblems of death, which often results in kitsch. The falsetto voices of the ASGARDSREI are recalled in the ghostly voices of many singers, usually a sinister blend of whispered words or hoarse cries. So, the point is that this thing that the Christian culture and polite society, liberalism in general, had sort of pretends doesn't exist and rejects, had a sort of spontaneous resurgence within young men who felt the urge to express the warlike and aggressive and angry aspects of human nature. And when the sort of mainstream black metal bands and musicians, when they become part of polite society, there are always people who would find that they are not very interesting anymore, and so they want to seek out something that's properly rebellious and actually is transgressive and is a sort of a rebellion against the modern world values, which brings us here today. And we see what happens when people reject that part of human nature which is symbolized by Thumnus with anger and so on. The Western nations, United States, European nations, allow themselves to be invaded and completely destroyed because they have lost the will to show anger and aggression. And they've lost the will to fight. And with this nihilism that we see everywhere around us, it's like people seeking some sort of consumerist culture to fill the void, seeking alternative identities. But I would say that those things could never work. There's Steve McNallen usually calls it coming home, to just embrace your roots, your religious identity. And it's like a person lost in the wilderness trying to find his way somewhere. But the only way to stop being lost is to come home, to sort of embrace who you are and embrace who you are in nature. So that's how I would explain the pagan worldview, is to embrace your own identity, embrace your roots, and embrace your loyalties that are given to you, that you are born with, that you don't choose. And that's the only way to fight nihilism and to get a meaningful life. So thank you very much for listening. Now, I don't really know how long I've been going on, but I'd like to have you ask me questions or comment upon what I said, so I can elaborate on anything that you might find interesting, or maybe what I said wasn't interesting at all. I don't know. Does anyone have anything to say? Any questions at all? Yes, sir.
I've read a little bit of Heidegger, and
right.
He's always talking about Dyson. You mentioned Dyson.
Yeah.
And the word means being. You mentioned being there.
Being there.
Or being. And I often wonder if that's also similar to identity, being. Because in English, a synonym for being is identity sometimes. And I'm an identitarian. So when I read Heidegger, I feel he'd be an identitarian by his very Dyson concepts.
Yes, that's how I read his description of what Dasein is. It's a humans never just exist as abstract entities. It's like the modern world, or modern liberalism, expects us to be interchangeable, sort of economical factors, basically.
No identity.
No identity, and the point of being there is just to point out that when a human being exists, when a person exists, he always exists there. He doesn't just exist. He always exists there at a specific point, with specific family relations, with specific. He never exists as an abstraction.
He's instantiated into a
fact. Yeah. The point is that this is a rejection of humans as just abstractions, as just individuals that can be counted, atomized individuals that just exist, float around by themselves, because you always have roots, and that's the only thing that can make your life meaningful. And the idea of Dasein, the idea of being there, is just that when we exist, we are thrown into the world. We don't start as a blank slate of paper and we're gonna write our life story on that blank piece of paper. Already when we start, there are things on the piece of paper. We have roots, we have family relations, we have a social situation, we have a tribal, an ethnic, a racial connection that we don't choose.
And then you're not a commodity.
You're not a commodity.
Be exchanged and replaced by people from other continents.
Exactly. I mean, that's the very thing that makes the modern mass migration horrible, because mass migration is built on rejecting your roots, on rejecting who you are, because you can just live anywhere, anyone can just live anywhere, because it's all about making money.
We're all exchangeable.
Yeah, everyone is exchangeable. It's like you're a commodity. You're like it's like if I let me give you this illustration, this example. If I lend you money, if I lend you $10, and when you give me the $10 back, I say, no, I want the very $10 I gave you. That would be completely unreasonable, because the whole point of money is to be interchangeable, is to be able to, you can use it as a symbol. So when I lend you money, I expect $10 back, not the very $10 bill that I gave you, right? But if I ask you to babysit my child for me, and you just give me any child back, well, I gave you one child, you give me one child back. That would be unreasonable, because, of course, the very purpose of a person, the very value in a person, the very value we see in a person is the relation we have to that person. That's why the notion of human equality is completely absurd. The notion of humans having equal value, that's completely absurd, because equal value for who? I mean, there is no person who regards everyone having equal value, because value is a function of the relationship you have to a certain person. And I usually sort of jokingly say to people who tell me that humans have the same value, I say, no, you don't believe that, because you don't believe that your children have the same value as Hitler, for example. Because there is no sort of abstract value in people. It's a particular value that is a function of your relation to them.
Not universalistic.
It's not universalistic at all. Universalism is the rejection of everything that is valuable in humans. So that's why universalism creates nihilism. It rejects everything we find valuable about life. And the thing that creates value in our life is our very roots. Does anyone else want to say something? Yes, in the back.
I just have a comment about the fact that you talked about the use of antidepressants. Key point, and probably nobody speaks about that. I come from France, and my people is one of the biggest consumer of debt. In that case, I just think it's a key point. It's very underlined in today's speech about the cause, political cause, maybe. But I just want to thank you about talking about the use of antidepressants.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, antidepressants. It's a symptom of obviously something being very wrong, because people don't they don't want to participate in life. They want to numb their minds, so they don't want to deal with reality, because reality gives them nothing. It's like people feel just completely alienated from the world, and so they just want to distract themselves. They find no purpose, and without roots and without a proper understanding of your history and who you are, you can have no purpose. And I would say that psychological sort of ill health today would be very difficult to understand if you don't take that aspect into consideration. Anyone else want to say something? Yes, sir.
I'll give you an example about these antidepressants. For example, countries that are really, really poor, as well as India, South America, but they know their roots, their identity, and they don't need any depressants. They don't need these things to resolve these problems, because they have their own soul, their own blood, focus on their roots. And it's a very good example. You don't need to be poor or be in a social problem to take antidepressants. And it's a problem with Europe. We are healthy, we have money, but although we need these things to
Yes.
fill the void.
Yeah, you can see that in if you compare suicide rates between countries, you'll see that the countries with the highest rates of suicide are often very well off economically. So it's something else that's lacking. It's not money. Anyone else want to say something? Yes?
On the part of Christianity, of course, I agree. I'm not Christian at all, and I agree that Christianity has interrupted and degraded many important European values. But on the other hand, I believe that we should add that Christianity has redirected and created some new ones. For example, the concept of chivalry, which is very similar, very comparable to the themoid element that you have just mentioned. It's very important not to ignore those parts. Like Christianity, of course it has caused trouble, but it's not the whole of it. There are some good elements, there are some elements that are very, very true, that stick true to the European psyche in general. That's what I believe.
Right. So when Christianity became established in Europe in the Middle Ages, there's a writer called James Russell who wrote a book called the Germanization of Early Medieval Christianity. He talked about a double conversion, basically that people were converted to Christianity, but Christianity was also converted to them.
Exactly.
So it's like they had to change Christianity in order to get people to accept it, because people wouldn't. They had to rewrite basically the Bible stories into the what's it called, the Helion? Is it called the Helion? I don't remember. Yeah. As an early Bible to get the Germanic peoples to accept Christianity, because they just found it extremely alien to their mentality. So they had to convert Christianity as well. And so yes, my point is not to say that all Christian people are bad, or that people cannot be Christians if they want to, or find any sort of solace in that. I want to explain the point that the pattern of rejecting roots and starting with a new start in everything, and just rejecting the roots and thinking that you can have an abstract idea of the world and reject a particular concrete world, and you can just start from anew. First, you have that started with the spiritual revolution, a new start in the spirit, and then a new start in politics, and a new start in culture, and finally a new start in biology. So now people have nothing. They have to make up their mind about who they are. I just want to point out that pattern started with Christianity, and obviously I didn't think of that myself. It's something that Nietzsche pointed out a long time ago, that liberalism and Marxism are just basically a continuation of the Christian value system without a supernatural God. It's just a continuation of the same values and so on. That's the same framework of that mindset, and I think we have to understand that. Yes. Anyone else? Anyone else? Yes.
First of all, thank you for your flawless deep speech. Really profound philosophical work. Thank you very much. And my thought, it resonates with your concluding statements about the essence of paganism as embracing your identity, your roots, right? Everything particular, everything valuable to us. And we'll indeed often hear that liberals say that how can you be proud of who you are? It's nothing to be proud of. You have to be proud of your achievements, and the way you are is again not your merit. But in fact, they of course misunderstand us. But the question is a little bit different, and it concerns the mechanism of possible changes. Often Heathen worldview is considered to be a kind of natural conservative. We preserve our identity and we resist to multiculturalism, to globalist trends. But if you need to make a change, especially in those parts of the world where the situation is really helpless, do we have any kind of revolutionary strategy? Of course, we're different from Christians, as this ideal type. I agree, of course, that we have to view Christianity organically, like Dominique Venner, for instance, did, and you perfectly commented on this issue. But they made a revolution, a spiritual revolution, as you also perfectly explained it, by making history from scratch, yes? So what will be our strategy? Do we have any kind of revolutionary approach, or maybe a combination of them, how to change things?
Yes, I want to point out that traditionalism, in the sense that I explained, is not opposed to progress. So progress is always based on building on what's already there, and the idea of starting from scratch is always dishonest, because you always have to accept some of the things that were already there, because or else you wouldn't make anything work. So it's like I said, it's a bit parasitical. It has to accept some aspects of what was there. So you can never start from new. The question was how we can make this
change, yes.
how we can make it. Yeah, I mean it's how can you make a paradigm shift, a revolution in the human mind? It's I've always seen our movement or white nationalism, which is my political identity basically, as a religious movement rather than a political movement. In terms of perspectives, I don't see things in like a 4-year perspective as a political term of office or anything like that. I see it as a completely different perspective that might take many generations to get in place. The only way we can make it work is to lead by example. We have networks of our own. We have basically our own communities outside of the communities that are in place, and people will be attracted to them because they are more fulfilling to be a part of. What I explained and what I talked about is the very reason why I think we will attract people, because we are the only ones, nationalists are the only ones who can provide any sense of meaning to people's lives. And I think the great sort of disease in the modern world is a sense of nihilism and a sense of alienation. And I think that's what people want to get away from, and we are the only ones who can offer anything there. So I think that's why we will be able to create this revolution.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it sounds promising. It's not like a revolution brought by some desert religions, which again throws you out of emptiness into nothing. It's overcoming of alienation. So this is our goal indeed, and something we have to achieve, not only to promise, but to make it real, make it felt by people, right? Any other questions in the audience? Please.
Yes, just a quick question. Do you have any literature you would recommend, books or such? On the topic.
On the topic. Well, that's a difficult question. I don't know. The Genealogy of Morals by Nietzsche is a must read, I would say, to understand the modern world. Nietzsche was basically a cultural pathologist. He explained the roots of pathology, just like a medical pathologist explains the causes and functions of different diseases. Nietzsche was a person who explained the cultural diseases in the modern world, and explained where they came from and their characteristics and so on, and described them. And I think that's important. The things that give me the most are basically I'm obviously Scandinavian, Nordic, and just reading our oldest sort of texts, the Icelandic sagas and Snorri Sturluson and well, even the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer and so on, and the Metamorphoses of Ovid, and the old texts that sort of that breathe a spirit that we don't have. That's what inspires me, and I think that's probably the most important thing. So that's what I would recommend. Anything else before we stop? Before I hand over the microphone to the other speaker.
Well, I'll throw in another quick question.
Okay.
So you're a fan of Heidegger?
I'm not a fan of Heidegger, no.
Well, your speech was on Heidegger.
No, it wasn't really on Heidegger. It's just that he has presented a concept that I find very useful. The concept of being thrown into the world, because it pinpoints what's wrong with the tabula rasa description of the world. It pinpoints what's completely wrong with the idea that we are born as blank sheets of paper, and we're going to sort of make up our minds about who we are going to be. So yeah, I don't read much Heidegger. I'm not a fan of Heidegger. No. It's just that he coined a concept that I find very useful. So that's why I gave him credit for it. I mentioned him. So it's nothing more than that, actually.
I've been reading lately some Frankfurt School, and Adorno and the Frankfurt School, they mention Heidegger a lot. He influenced a lot of their thinking, Heidegger.
Yeah, the Frankfurt School, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
They're not stupid.
Um,
They definitely were onto something. They know how politics works. They know.
I think they do.
Yeah,
I think they do.
and I think it's time for us to sort of wisen up on how politics works. Is that it? No one else? Okay, well, thank you for listening to me.